The dim glow of neon signs flickered across the rain-slicked windows of the rusty chain saloon, a forgotten outpost on the edge of the Nevada desert where the air hung heavy with the scent of stale beer and engine oil. It was a place where shadows clung to the corners, and the jukebox hummed forgotten country ballads about lost roads and broken oaths. Outside, thunder rumbled like the growl of distant Harleys, but inside, the Friday night crowd of weathered riders and locals nursed their drinks in quiet defiance of the storm. In the heart of it all stood Ethan Hargrove, his broad shoulders hunched over a half-empty glass of whiskey. At 42, Ethan carried the weight of too many miles on his leather vest. Patched with the emblem of the Iron Vipers, a coiled serpent that symbolized unbreakable bonds forged in the fires of war and regret. His face, scarred from a roadside ambush a decade ago, told stories he never shared. The ambush that took his brother in arms, the promise he'd whispered over a dying fire to watch over the fallen man's family. But life had a way of burying oaths under layers of dust and denial. Ethan had drifted, running odd jobs for the club, avoiding the pull of that old vow like a man steering clear of quicksand. The door creaked open with a gust of wind, letting in the patter of rain and a small figure that no one expected. She couldn't have been more than 8, her yellow raincoat dripping puddles on the worn wooden floor, a backpack slung over one shoulder like a lifeline. Her dark curls were matted, eyes wide with a fear that cut through the bar's haze, sharper than any knife. The girl, Olivia, though no one knew her name yet, clutched a rolled-up tube of paper in her tiny fists, her breaths coming in shaky gasps. Conversations stuttered to a halt as heads turned, the clink of glasses fading into an uneasy silence. What was a child doing here, alone in this den of grease and grit? Bartender Ray, a grizzled veteran with tattoos snaking up his arms like forgotten rivers, leaned over the counter. "Hey kid, you lost. This ain't no place for—" But Olivia didn't wait. She marched straight to the center of the room, where a scarred pool table served as the unofficial stage for tall tales and brawls. Unfurling the tube with trembling hands, she pinned the paper to the green felt, smoothing it out with palms that smelled faintly of crayons and desperation. It was a painting, childlike yet haunting, a biker sprawled in the dust of a sun-baked road. His helmet cracked like an eggshell, surrounded by wildflowers that bloomed defiantly from the cracks in the earth. Above him, a convoy of shadowy figures on roaring bikes circled like guardians, their faces blurred but fierce. In the corner, scrawled in wobbly letters, read, "For Daddy. He promised to come home." The bar went deathly still. Ethan felt it first, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain seeping under the door. He'd seen that road before, the one twisting through the Badlands where the Vipers had lost one of their own 5 years back. Tommy Ruiz, a brother who'd pulled Ethan from the wreck of their last big run, leaving behind a wife and a daughter no one spoke of anymore. Tommy's promise echoed in Ethan's mind. "If I don't make it, brother, you look after them. Swear it." Ethan had sworn, but grief and the club's endless rides had eroded the edges of that oath until it felt like a ghost. Olivia's voice broke the hush, small but steady, like a spark in the dark. "He fell here, like in the story he told me, but the angels on bikes. They always come back for the lost ones." She looked up, scanning the faces, hardened men with knuckles scarred from fights they didn't start, women with eyes that had seen too much betrayal. No one moved at first. A burly rider in the corner, Jax, shifted uncomfortably, his beer forgotten. He'd ridden with Tommy, shared smokes under starlit skies, promising the club would be family forever. Ethan rose slowly, his boots thudding against the floorboards like a heartbeat. The painting pulled at him, the wildflowers a cruel reminder of the bouquet Tommy had tucked into his saddlebag that last ride, a gift for his girl. "Kid," he said, voice rough as gravel, kneeling to her level. The scent of wet earth clung to her coat, mingling with the bar's tobacco haze. "What's your name? Where's your mum?" "Olivia," she whispered, tracing the fallen figure with a finger. "Mum's at the hospital. She said Daddy's not coming home this time, but he promised. And you look like one of the angels." Her eyes, bright with unshed tears, locked onto his viper patch. It wasn't accusation in her gaze, but hope, raw, unfiltered, the kind that could shatter a man rebuilt from ruins. The room exhaled collectively as Ethan straightened, the weight of eyes upon him. Jack stood next, then Marcus, the club's quiet mechanic whose hands shook only when remembering lost brothers. Whispers rippled. "That's Tommy's girl. Ruiz's blood." The painting wasn't just paper and paint. It was a summons, a faded oath dragged into the light. Ethan felt the old promise stir, coiling tight in his chest like the serpent on his vest. He'd failed once, letting distance and denial win. But here, in the flicker of neon and the patter of rain, something shifted. The Vipers didn't just ride for glory or grudge, they rode for the unspoken vows that bound them tighter than blood. Ray cleared his throat, sliding a glass of water toward Olivia. "We'll get you home, sweetheart. But first, tell us about your dad." As she began, haltingly, describing the stories Tommy spun of midnight runs and unbreakable packs, the bar transformed. Laughter faded into listening, cynicism yielding to a quiet reverence. Ethan watched, the painting burning into his mind, knowing this night marked the unraveling of his solitary drift. A little girl's art had pierced the armor of 50 hardened souls, and by dawn, engines would roar not in rage, but in redemption. Outside, the storm broke harder, lightning etching the sky like veins of fire, but inside, a new fire kindled, one of loyalty rekindled, promises dusted off, ready to ride against the winds of forgetfulness. Ethan placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder, the touch grounding him. "He kept his word to you, kid, and we'll keep ours to him." The words hung in the air, simple yet seismic, as the first bikes revved in the lot, answering the call of a fallen brother's legacy. The rain hammered the tin roof of the rusty chain saloon like a relentless drumbeat, syncing with the low rumble of engines idling in the gravel lot outside. Ethan Hargrove's hand lingered on Olivia's shoulder, the warmth of her small frame seeping through the damp fabric of her raincoat, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in his bones. The bar's patrons, 50 souls etched by sun and scar, formed a loose circle around the pool table, their shadows stretching long under the hazy pendants. The painting lay there like a battlefield map, its colors vivid against the faded green felt. The fallen biker, Tommy Ruiz, immortalized in crayon strokes that captured the sprawl of his body not in defeat, but in quiet surrender to the earth. Olivia's story unfolded in fits and starts, her voice threading through the hush like smoke from a dying fire. She spoke of bedtime tales Tommy wove under the glow of a single lamp in their cramped apartment on the outskirts of Reno. Stories of iron-clad brothers who rode through storms to honor the fallen, their headlights cutting the night like promises etched in steel. "Daddy said the Vipers were his shield," she murmured, her finger hovering over the wildflowers in the drawing. They'd circle back, no matter how far the road pulled him, but this time, the road won. Her eyes, dark pools reflecting the neon flicker, darted to Ethan. In them, he saw not just grief, but a flicker of recognition. The same unyielding trust Tommy had placed in him all those years ago, back when they were fresh-faced recruits, dodging bullets in a desert skirmish halfway across the world. Jax, the burly rider with a beard like tangled barbed wire, knelt beside her, his massive frame folding with uncharacteristic gentleness. He'd been Tommy's road partner, the one who patched tires and shared flasks during endless hauls. "Your old man saved my hide more times than I can count, kid," Jax rumbled, his voice thick with the gravel of suppressed emotion. that promise he made. It wasn't just words. We all heard it round the campfire that night. The memory hung heavy, a crackling blaze in the Badlands, Tommy's laugh booming as he passed the bottle, his eyes already shadowed by the premonition of the run that would claim him. A rival crew, whispers of betrayal from within, and a stretch of highway where the asphalt turned treacherous under a veil of dust. Ethan pulled up a stool, the wood creaking under his weight, and signaled Ray for another round. Water for Olivia, black coffee for the rest. The bartender nodded, his tattooed arms flexing as he poured, the steam rising like ghosts from the mugs. Tommy's wife, Lena, she's the one in the hospital, Ray said quietly, sliding the drinks across the scarred counter. Complications from the wreck's aftermath. Docs say it's touch and go. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Ethan hadn't visited, hadn't even sent a card, letting the club's code of ride on justify his absence. But now, with Olivia's painting staring him down, the excuses crumbled like dry clay. The circle tightened as Marcus, the mechanic with oil-stained fingers and a limp from an old club skirmish, leaned in. His eyes, usually distant behind grease-smeared glasses, sharpened on the artwork. "Look at those flowers," he muttered, tracing the defiant blooms. "Tommy picked 'em fresh that morning. Said they were for you, Liv. Tucked 'em in his bag like a talisman." Olivia nodded, a small smile breaking through the tears, the kind that lit her face like dawn-piercing fog. It stirred something primal in the room, a collective ache for the man who'd bandaged wounds, mediated beefs, and always, always kept his word. Tommy hadn't just ridden with the Vipers, he'd been their moral compass, the one who reminded them that leather and chrome meant nothing without honor. Whispers turned to plans, the bar's haze thickening with purpose. Outside, the storm eased to a drizzle, the first stars punching through the clouds like distant signals. Ethan stood, his viper patch catching the light, the serpent seeming to uncoil. "We ride at first light," he declared, his voice steady, cutting through the murmurs. "To the hospital first. See Lena through. Then we settle this." Settle what? The question lingered unspoken. Tommy's crash hadn't been accident. Rumors had festered like untreated wounds. A crooked sheriff's deputy, pockets lined by rival outfits, turning a blind eye to sabotage on that cursed stretch of road. Corruption that festered in the shadows of authority, preying on those who lived by their own code. Jax rose, clapping a hand on Ethan's back, the gesture sealing an old pact. For Tommy, for her. Nods rippled through the crowd, veterans with faded dog tags, women who'd mended more than vests, all bound by the invisible threads of chosen family. Olivia clutched the painting to her chest, the paper crinkling softly. "Will you bring him back?" she asked Ethan, her whisper barely audible over the patter of residual rain. He crouched again, meeting her gaze level. The scent of crayons mingled with the sharp tang of coffee, grounding the moment in something achingly real. "Not his body, kid, but his spirit? Yeah, we'll ride it home." The promise settled over him like a well-worn jacket, heavy yet familiar. For years, Ethan had chased horizons to outrun the guilt, the what-ifs of that sworn oath. But Olivia's arrival, her art a beacon in the neon gloom, dragged it all into focus. Redemption wasn't a distant thunder. It was the engine's roar, building in his chest, pulling him toward the dawn. As the group dispersed into hushed conversations, mapping routes, checking bikes, the bar felt alive, transformed from a way station to a war room of the heart. Ray dimmed the lights, the jukebox falling silent, leaving only the murmur of voices and the occasional clink of keys. Ethan lingered by the door, watching Olivia sip her water, her small form dwarfed by the giants around her. The painting, now carefully rolled, promised more than memory. It demanded action. And in the quiet hours before the ride, Ethan felt the stirrings of a man reborn, not from vengeance, but from the simple, seismic act of keeping faith. The clock above the bar ticked toward midnight, each second a countdown to the road ahead. Engines would awaken the desert soon, a convoy of steel and soul, honoring a fallen brother and the little girl who'd reminded them why they rode. In the flicker of dying neon, Ethan's scars seemed less like burdens and more like badges, ready for the miles that would test every vow. The first hints of dawn bled across the horizon like diluted rust, painting the Nevada Badlands in strokes of muted gold and shadow. Ethan Hargrove straddled his Harley, the engine's low thrum vibrating through his bones as he adjusted the throttle, the familiar growl a balm against the night's lingering chill. The convoy assembled in the Rusty Chains lot, 50 bikes in a ragged line, their chrome gleaming faintly under the sodium lamps that buzzed like weary sentinels. Olivia sat perched on Jax's sled, her small hands gripping the sides of his leather jacket, the rolled painting tucked safely in her backpack. Her eyes, wide with a mix of awe and trepidation, scanned the riders. Grizzled veterans like Marcus, whose tools clinked softly in his saddlebags, and quieter souls like Lena's old friend Sarah, who'd shown up at the bar's back door just before revving time, her face set with the determination of someone who'd lost too much to silence. Ethan glanced back, the wind whispering through the scrub brush that flanked the cracked asphalt. The air carried the sharp bite of sage and dew-kissed earth, a scent that tugged at memories of Tommy's last ride. The way he'd whooped into the wind, wildflowers pressed against his chest like a secret vow. "Stay close," Ethan called over the idling engines, his voice carrying the weight of command he'd long avoided. Jax nodded, revving once in affirmation, the sound echoing off the distant mesas like a challenge to the fading stars. No one spoke of the risks, the winding highway that had claimed Tommy, the whispers of foul play that now coiled tighter with each passing mile. This wasn't a joyride. It was a pilgrimage, engines bearing witness to oaths renewed in the neon hush of the night before. They rolled out as one, tires crunching gravel before smoothing onto the blacktop, headlights piercing the pre-dawn gloom like lances. The convoy snaked through canyons where rock faces loomed like ancient guardians, the roar of exhaust mingling with the occasional cry of a coyote fading into the distance. Ethan led, his mind a storm of fragmented scenes. The ambush years ago that had scarred his jaw, Tommy's hand steady on his shoulder amid the chaos, the promise exchanged in the acrid smoke of gunfire. "Watch my girl if the road takes me," Tommy had said, his grin fierce even then. Ethan had nodded, the words sealing a bond stronger than any club bylaws. But grief had a way of eroding resolve, turning brothers into ghosts until Olivia's painting shattered the illusion. Halfway to Reno, the sky lightened to a bruised lavender, the sun's edge teasing the peaks. Sarah pulled alongside Ethan for a stretch, her bike humming steady, wind whipping her ponytail like a banner. She'd been Tommy's confidant, the one who'd patched up club scrapes in her garage-turned-makeshift clinic. "Lena's been holding on by threads," she shouted over the din, her voice laced with the raw edge of shared sorrow. "The hospital bills piled up after the crash. Doc said it was just bad luck, but we know better. That deputy, Harlan, always sniffing around the vipers, taking payoffs from the shadow hounds to look the other way." The name hung in the air, bitter as desert dust. Harlan, a badge tarnished by greed, who'd waved through the rival crew's sabotage on that fatal bend. Corruption, like his, festered in the cracks of authority, preying on those who rode by honor alone. Ethan's grip tightened on the handlebars, the leather creaking under his scarred knuckles. He'd heard the rumors, dismissed them as bar talk, but now they burned with purpose. Justice here wasn't about fists or firepower. It was the slow unraveling of lies, the exposure of truths buried under official stamps. Olivia twisted in her seat, pointing at a flock of ravens scattering from a Joshua tree, their wings black against the rising light. "Daddy said birds like that guide the lost home," she called out, her voice piping clear amid the thunder of engines. Jax chuckled softly, the sound rumbling deep. But Ethan's chest tightened. The girl carried Tommy's light unscarred by the world's cynicism, a reminder that promises weren't chains but lifelines. The hospital loomed on the city's edge as the sun crested fully, its white walls stark against the sprawl of strip malls and faded billboards. The convoy slowed, engines cutting to a respectful purr before silencing altogether in the visitor lot. Nurses paused mid-stride, eyes widening at the sea of leather and chrome, but no one challenged them. Something in the riders' solemn faces spoke louder than any ID. Ethan dismounted first, boots hitting pavement with a solid thud, and lifted Olivia down, her sneakers scuffing lightly. The air here smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers, a far cry from the open road, but it grounded the moment in stark reality. Inside, the corridors echoed with the beep of monitors and muffled voices, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on linoleum floors. Sarah led the way to Lena's room, her steps measured, the group's presence a quiet force that parted staff like a tide. Lena lay propped in bed, her face pale as the sheets, dark hair fanned like a halo, and DV dripping steadily beside her. Tubes snaked across her arm, signs of the strain from injuries that lingered long after Tommy's fall. Complications no one had anticipated, fueled by stress and solitude. She stirred as they entered, her eyes fluttering open, confusion giving way to recognition when she saw Olivia. "Mummy!" Olivia rushed forward, climbing onto the bed with careful hugs, the backpack thumping softly. Lena's arms enveloped her, weak but fierce, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. Ethan hung back in the doorway, the room's sterility pressing against him like an unwelcome judgment. He'd failed her too, this woman who'd trusted the club's word as much as her husband's. Jax and Marcus lingered near the window, their bulk softened by the sight. While Sarah busied herself adjusting pillows, her hands steady from years of quiet care, Lena's gaze found Ethan, sharpening with a mix of relief and unspoken questions. "You came," she whispered, voice hoarse from disuse, the words carrying the freight of years. "All of you." He stepped closer, the scent of hospital bleach mingling with the faint leather polish from his vest. "For Tommy," he said simply, pulling the rolled painting from Olivia's pack and unfurling it on the bedside table. The colors popped under the clinical light, the fallen rider, the circling guardians, the wildflowers defiant. Lena traced the lines, her finger lingering on the scrawled dedication, a sob escaping like a breath held too long. "It's him," she murmured, eyes distant, reliving the knock at her door that night, the deputy's vague reports, the empty highway they'd scoured for answers. He'd be proud. But Harlan, he buried it all, said it was speed, not sabotage. The hounds paid him to erase the tracks. The admission hung heavy, a thread pulling at the room's fragile peace. Ethan nodded, the serpent on his patch seeming to stir. "We're not here to bury more. We'll dig it up. Truth first, then whatever honor demands. No threats, just resolve, the kind that bound the vipers tighter than fear." Olivia nestled closer to her mother, the painting a bridge between loss and legacy. Outside, the convoy waited, engines cold but souls ignited, the desert wind whispering through cracked windows. In that room, amid beeps and whispers, Ethan felt the old scars ache not with pain, but purpose. Redemption rode on the edge of exposure, and as Lena squeezed his hand, frail yet unyielding, the promise Tommy had exacted bloomed anew, wildflowers in cracked earth. The road ahead twisted toward confrontation, but for now, family gathered, chosen and unbreakable, under the harsh light of a new day. The sterile hum of the hospital corridor seemed to pulse in time, with Ethan's heartbeat, as he stepped out of Lena's room, the door clicking shut behind him like a sealed vow. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, casting elongated shadows across the polished floors, where the faint scent of floor wax mingled with the underlying tang of medicine. Olivia had curled up beside her mother, the painting smoothed flat on the bed like a talisman warding off the beeps of machines, while Jax and Marcus stood guard by the window, their silhouettes framed against the parking lot where the convoy's bikes gleamed like dormant beasts. Sarah lingered inside, her voice a soft murmur of comfort, but Ethan felt the pull of the road calling him onward, the unfinished business of Tommy's fall demanding more than bedside promises. He nodded to the others, a silent signal that rippled through the group like wind through tall grass. "We split up," Ethan said, his voice low, gravel rough from the night's confessions. "Half stay here with Lena and the girl. The rest, we head to the station. Harlan's shift ends at noon. Time to remind him what oaths mean." No one argued. The Vipers moved as one organism, bound by the invisible code that had drawn them from the rusty chain's haze to this clinical dawn. Jax clapped Ethan's shoulder, the contact solid as forged steel, before turning back to the room. Marcus handed over a small toolkit from his belt, wrenches and wire cutters. Innocuous tools that spoke of mechanical truths over brute force. Outside, the air hit like a fresh page, crisp with the desert's midday warmth, sagebrush whispering secrets to the breeze. The convoy divided. 20 bikes peeled off toward the heart of Reno, engines purring low to avoid drawing eyes too soon. Ethan led them, the highway unfolding like a scarred vein through the urban sprawl. Billboards blurring past, their faded promises mocking the real ones etched in memory. The riders fanned out in loose formation, leather creaking, the sun warming patches on their vests. Ethan's mind replayed Lena's words, her frail grip on his hand, a tether to the man who'd saved him from more than one wreck. Tommy's crash. Tires shredded by hidden caltrops, the rival Shadowhound's mark left in the dust, and Harlan's report sealing it as driver error. Corruption like that didn't just bury bodies, it eroded souls, turning guardians into ghosts. They pulled into the sheriff's station lot under the noon sun, dust devils swirling lazily around the squat brick building, its flag limp in the still air. The place reeked of authority's false shine. Patrol cars lined up like obedient hounds, a coffee pot gurgling inside through the open door. Ethan killed his engine first, the silence amplifying the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city. The group dismounted, boots scuffing gravel, forming a quiet wall of resolve. No weapons flashed. This was about unmasking shadows, not casting new ones. Ray, who'd ridden up from the bar with a thermos of black coffee and a ledger of old club debts, hung back by the bikes, his eyes scanning for trouble. Harlan emerged from the side door, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief that had seen better days, his uniform rumpled like his conscience. At first he smirked, recognizing the viper patches but dismissing them as yesterday's noise. "Hargrove," he drawled, voice oily as spilled crankcase. "Thought you lot rode out of my jurisdiction after that last dust-up. What's this? Parade for the fallen." The deputy leaned against a post, arms crossed, but his eyes flickered. Uncertainty beneath the bluster, the weight of hidden payoffs pressing like an ill-fitted badge. Ethan stepped forward, the sun glinting off his scarred jaw, close enough to catch the sour whiff of cheap aftershave. "Not a parade, Harlan, a reckoning." He pulled a folded printout from his vest pocket. Marcus had pieced it together overnight from dashcam scraps and witness whispers, timestamps aligning the Hound's truck with the sabotage site. No accusations flew wild, just facts laid bare, the paper crisp in the heat. Tommy Ruiz didn't lose control. "Your report says speed, but the treads tell different. Caltrops don't scatter on their own." The other riders shifted subtly, a circle of silent witnesses, their presence a pressure without threat, the kind that forced truth to surface like bubbles in still water. Harlan's smirk faltered, colour draining from his face as he snatched the paper, scanning it with trembling fingers. The station door creaked open, a young deputy peering out, but one look at the assembled vipers sent him retreating. "This is nothing," Harlan muttered, crumpling the edge, but his voice cracked, the lie brittle as dry twigs. Ethan held his gaze, unblinking, the desert wind tugging at their clothes like an impatient spectator. Memories flooded. Tommy's laugh around that campfire, the promise to protect not just family, but the fragile line between right and wrong. "You took money to blind yourself," Ethan continued, tone even, measured as a heartbeat. "But oaths run deeper than bribes. Tommy's girl showed us his painting last night, reminded us what we stand for. You gonna make this right, or do we take it higher?" The deputy sagged against the post, the handkerchief twisting in his fist, sweat beading despite the shade. Whispers from the riders underscored the moment. Jack's murmuring about old runs, Sarah's voice steady with details of Lena's suffering. Harlan's eyes darted, the corruption's web tightening around him like barbed wire. "All right," he rasped finally, the admission a dam breaking. "The hounds. They leaned on me, said it'd be one oversight, but it snowballed." No excuses landed, just the raw unraveling, the first thread pulled in a tapestry of deceit. Ethan nodded once, the serpent on his vest catching the light like approval. Justice here was poetic, not punitive. A confession that would echo through channels cleaner than his own, reports filed, inquiries sparked without a single fist raised. As Harlan slunk back inside, radio crackling with his hurried calls to superiors, the riders exhaled collectively, the tension easing like fog under sun. Ethan remounted, the engine's roar a victory hymn, but subdued, honoring the moral weight. The convoy reformed, heading back toward the hospital, the road ahead clearer now, though shadows of the hounds lingered on the horizon. Redemption wasn't a single ride, it was layers peeled back, promises honored in the quiet spaces between revs. Back at the rusty chain by dusk, tales would spread, but for now the wind carried their progress, wildflowers in spirit if not in bloom. The sun dipped lower, gilding the mesas, as Ethan felt Tommy's presence in the throttle's pulse, a brother riding shotgun, unseen but felt. Olivia's painting had started it all, a child's vision, silencing cynics and stirring souls. And in the balance of truth unearthed, the vipers rode stronger, family forged in the fire of kept words. If this chapter's grip on your heart feels real, smash that like button. It fuels these stories of quiet courage and unbreakable bonds to reach more riders on their own roads. The late afternoon sun hung heavy over Reno, casting long shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the hospital parking lot. Ethan Hargrove eased his Harley to a stop, the engine's growl fading into the hum of distant traffic and the faint chirp of cicadas hidden in the scrub along the fence line. Dust from the ride clung to his boots, a fine grit that spoke of miles covered and truths unearthed, while the air carried the sterile bite of the building mixed with the earthy tang of cooling asphalt. The remaining convoy pulled in behind him, 15 bikes now, their riders dismounting with the quiet efficiency of those who'd stared down storms before. Jack swung off his sled, Olivia still clutched in his arms like a precious cargo, her eyes bright with the thrill of the wind-whipped journey, though questions lingered in their depths. Inside, the corridors felt narrower than before, the fluorescent buzz overhead pressing down like unspoken doubts. Ethan led the way, his steps measured, the weight of Harlan's confession a stone in his gut. The deputy's unraveling had been clean. No raised voices, no drawn lines, but ripples spread fast in a town where badges and leathers eyed each other warily. Sarah met them at the nurse's station, her face drawn but steady, wiping her hands on her jeans as if shaking off the residue of worry. "Lena's resting," she murmured, falling in step. The doc's upped her meds, said the stress was flaring things, but she's asking for you, Ethan. All of you. Her words hung like a bridge between the road's raw justice and the room's fragile peace, the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby lounge underscoring the normalcy they all craved. Lena's door stood ajar, spilling soft light into the hall, where monitors beeped a steady rhythm like a heartbeat shared among the group. Olivia slipped free from Jack's and darted inside, her sneakers whispering against the tile, backpack bouncing. "Mummy, we went on a ride, like Daddy's stories." Her voice, high and unbroken, cut through the tension, drawing weak smiles from the riders clustered in the doorway. Lena propped herself up, pillows fluffing under her elbows, her color a touch better than the pallor of morning, though shadows bruised the skin beneath her eyes. The painting lay on the side table, its edges curling slightly in the room's dry air, the wildflowers a splash of color against the clinical white. Ethan entered last, his bulk filling the frame, the leather of his vest creaking softly as he leaned against the wall. The others fanned out, Jack's by the window, where sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting bars of gold across the floor. Marcus fiddling with a loose IV stand, his mechanic's hands seeking something to fix. "We saw Harlan," Ethan said, voice low and even, meeting Lena's gaze. The words landed gently, no triumph in them, just the quiet satisfaction of a knot untied. He talked, admitted the hounds leaned on him, caltrops on that bend, not fate. "It's in motion now, reports to the state boys, clean ones this time. No more burying Tommy's ride." Lena's breath caught, her fingers twisting the sheet, the fabric whispering against her skin. Tears welled but didn't fall, held back by a resolve that mirrored Tommy's own, the kind that had kept her standing through lonely nights and mounting bills. "You did what he would have," she whispered, reaching for Olivia, who climbed up to nestle against her side. The girl's head rested on her mother's shoulder, curls tangling with the thin blanket, a picture of fragile unity that silenced the room. Jack shifted, clearing his throat, the sound rough as he pulled a small envelope from his pocket. Club funds pooled overnight, enough to cover the next month's care without the sting of charity. "From the brothers," he rumbled, placing it on the table beside the painting. "Tommy's legacy. We ride for it, same as always." But peace fractured subtly as Sarah's phone buzzed, the vibration sharp in the hush. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening like a throttle gripped too hard. "It's from the station, Harlan's superiors. They're pulling him in for questioning." But words out. The hounds know. Now the name evoked a chill, the rival crew a shadow that had dogged the Vipers for years, their rides marked by underhanded jabs rather than open roads. Ethan felt the stir of old instincts, the serpent on his patch seeming to tighten. No one spoke of revenge, that wasn't their code, yet the ethical snag pulled at him. Exposing Harlan might flush out the hound's deeper rot, but it invited retaliation, the kind that tested loyalties and left scars deeper than chrome. Outside the window, a patrol car idled in the lot, its lights off, but presence unmistakable, a reminder that authorities' house cleaning came with watchers. Marcus leaned in, voice a murmur. "We could ride out, scout their turf, nothing heavy, just eyes. Make sure they don't circle back here." Temptation flickered in Ethan's chest, the road's call a siren's song. But he glanced at Olivia, her small hand tracing the painting's fallen figure, and shook his head. "No, we stand ground here first. Lena and the girl, they're the heart of this. Harlan's confession buys time, but truth's our weapon, not wheels." The decision settled like dust after a skid, moral clarity cutting through the haze of impulse. Jax nodded, respect in his eyes, the group a fortress of chosen kin, bound not by blood, but by the oaths that outlasted Rex. Lena watched them, her gaze shifting from face to face, gratitude weaving through the lines of exhaustion. Tommy always said you were his shield, she said softly, voice gaining strength. Not for fights, but for the quiet battles, the ones that keep a family whole. Olivia looked up, her eyes locking on Ethan's, innocence piercing his armor. Did the bad men go away, like in the stories? He knelt by the bed, the linoleum cool under his knee, and placed a hand near hers, not touching but close enough to bridge the gap. The scent of hospital soap mingled with the faint leather from the doorway, grounding the moment. Not gone, kid, but lighter. Your dad's painting lit the way, showed us how to ride straight. As evening crept in, painting the room in hues of amber through the blinds, the riders took shifts, some grabbing vending machine sandwiches that tasted of cardboard resolve, others stepping out to check bikes under the lot's lamps. Whispers of plans formed, not assaults, but safeguards, calls to neutral contacts, routes mapped to shield the hospital from prying eyes. Ethan lingered longest, the weight of redemption settling deeper, Tommy's promise no longer a ghost but a compass. The hound's shadow loomed, a final test of integrity against corruption's pull. But in this room, with engines waiting and family gathered, honor burned brighter than any headlight. The monitors beeped on, a steady pulse mirroring the convoy's unspoken vow. Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying the promise of night rides and resolutions yet to unfold, wildflowers rooting in the cracks of hardship, defiant and alive. Night settled over Reno like a heavy blanket, the hospital's exterior lights humming to life against the deepening indigo sky, where stars began to prick through the haze of city glow. Ethan Hargrove stood by the window in Lena's room, his silhouette etched sharp against the glass, arms crossed over his chest as if holding back the tide of what might come next. The room's air was thick with the quiet vigil, the soft whir of machines, Olivia's even breathing as she dozed on the edge of the bed, her small chest rising and falling in rhythm with her mother's hand gently stroking her hair. Jax paced the corridor outside, his boots muffled on the carpet, while Marcus tinkered with a vending machine down the hall, the clink of coins a distant counterpoint to the tension coiling in Ethan's gut. The painting rested on the nightstand, its colors muted in the lamplight, a silent sentinel watching over the fragile piece they'd carved from the day's revelations. Lena stirred, her eyes opening to find Ethan's gaze reflected in the window. "You don't have to stand guard all night," she whispered, her voice a thread of silk in the hush, laced with the faint rasp of recovery. The IV stand cast a long shadow across the floor, its drip a metronome marking time's reluctant passage. Ethan turned slowly, the leather of his vest sighing against his frame, and pulled up a chair, the plastic creaking under his weight. The scent of cooling coffee lingered from the styrofoam cups scattered on a side table, mingling with the ever-present antiseptic that clung to everything like regret. "Can't leave it half done," he replied, his tone low, gravelly from hours of road-worn resolve. "Harlan's talking, but the hounds, they don't fade easy. Tommy knew that, rode against their shadows more than once." She nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket, the fabric soft and worn from too many washes. Memories flickered in her eyes, Tommy's late-night returns, dust-caked and grinning. Tales of close calls spun into legends for Olivia's eager ears. "He always came back," Lena said, a faint smile ghosting her lips, though sorrow edged it like thorns on wildflowers. "Even when the road tried to keep him. You were his anchor out there, Ethan, the one he trusted to pull him through." The words landed soft but sure, stirring the embers of that old promise, the campfire oath under a canopy of stars, smoke curling like unspoken fears. Ethan had drifted after Tommy's fall, burying the vow under layers of endless miles and club runs that numbed the ache. But Olivia's arrival, her crayon summon, had dragged it kicking into the light, forcing him to confront the man he'd become. Scarred, yes, but not irredeemable. A knock echoed from the door, sharp and urgent, pulling Jax back into the room with a deputy trailing him. Not Harlan, but a younger one, uniform crisp and eyes wide with the gravity of his errand. The air shifted, charged like the moments before a storm breaks, the young man's boots squeaking faintly on the tile. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, voice steady but laced with deference, holding out a manila envelope sealed with official tape. From the captain, Harlan's full statement, names, dates, the works. The Hound's leader's already in cuffs up in Ely, turned himself in after hearing the heat's on, said something about cleaning house before it burns down. He glanced at Lena and Olivia, his posture softening. The envelope, a bridge from corruption's depths to daylight's edge. No fanfare, just the quiet machinery of justice grinding forward, sparked by the Viper's unyielding presence. Ethan took the envelope, the paper cool and weighty in his calloused hands, and nodded once, the serpent patch on his vest catching the lamp's glow like a nod from Tommy himself. "Appreciate it," he murmured, the words carrying the freight of years unspoken. The deputy lingered a beat, then retreated, the door clicking shut with a finality that eased the room's breath. Jax exhaled, running a hand through his beard, the wiry strands rasping. "It's over? Just like that?" Skepticism threaded his tone, born of too many rides where shadows lingered longer than dawn. But Ethan slit the seal, scanning the pages under the dim light, testimonies aligning like puzzle pieces, the Hound's sabotage laid bare, Harlan's bribes mapped out in black and white. No blood spilled, no engines roaring in pursuit. Justice here was the slow bloom of truth, poetic in its restraint, honoring the moral code that had bound Tommy to his brothers. Lena reached out, her hand finding Ethan's arm. The touch light but anchoring, skin warm against the chill of leather. "You kept your word," she said simply, tears finally tracing silent paths down her cheeks, glistening like dew on morning sage. Olivia stirred, blinking awake to the murmur of voices, her eyes finding the envelope with childlike curiosity. "Did the angels win?" she asked, sitting up, the blanket pooling around her like a cape of forgotten dreams. Ethan managed a smile, rough around the edges but genuine, kneeling to her level once more. The floor's coolness seeped through his jeans, grounding him in the moment's tenderness. "Yeah, kid. They rode it out, brought the light back." He unfurled the painting gently, holding it so she could see the wildflowers anew. Their colors, vivid symbols of resilience, blooming where the road had cracked. The group lingered as night deepened, stories weaving through the hours like threads in a tapestry. Jax recounting Tommy's wildest runs, Marcus sketching bike mods on a napkin that doubled as hope for Lena's discharge, Sarah slipping in with fresh water and quiet assurances. Outside, the convoy's engines stayed silent, guardians in the lot, headlights off, but ready. Ethan's scars itched faintly under the room's warmth, not with pain, but with the healing pull of purpose reclaimed. Redemption wasn't a thunderous clash. It was this. The chosen family, gathered in a sterile room, oaths fulfilled in whispers and wills unbroken. Tommy's legacy rode on in them, a convoy of souls against the cynicism that tried to bury it. By midnight, the hospital quieted to a hush, the wind outside carrying the faint howl of distant coyotes, as if the desert itself approved. Ethan stepped out to the lot, the gravel crunching underfoot, stars wheeling overhead like witnesses to the night's close. The Hound's threat dissolved into echoes, authority mending its fractures, and in the balance, honor stood tall. He revved his Harley once, the rumble a farewell to shadows, then let it idle low, a promise kept vibrating through the dark. Back inside, Olivia's painting watched over sleep, wildflowers eternal, a little girl's vision that had silenced a bar and stirred a brotherhood to ride true. As the first light of another dawn teased the horizon, the vipers prepared to scatter, not in fracture, but in strength renewed, engines awaiting the call of new roads. Tommy's spirit lingered in the throttle's hum, a fallen brother lifted by the unbreakable bonds of loyalty and light. Thank you for riding along on this journey of promises kept and hearts mended. If these tales of quiet honor touch your soul, hit that subscribe button and join the convoy. We've got more stories revving up straight from the road to your screen.